Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Me tocará hablarles ahora un poco de lo que yo llamo participación cívica transfronteriza, cross-border civic engagement. Y básicamente es la participación que tenemos nosotros para influir en lo que ocurre en nuestra comunidad. Como estamos en un ambiente binacional, en la mera frontera, me voy a cambiar un poco entre inglés y español. So today we'll talk a little bit about what I call cross-border civic engagement, the importance of cross-border civic engagement. I really learned about this back in the beginning of the 90s when there was a group that decided to gather civic leaders from San Diego primarily to discuss issues that were affecting the community. And part of it had to do with the fact that San Diego was divided in 18 cities. And that created many different interests pulling in many different ways. This group was organized by Bill McGill, who had been chancellor at UCSD, by Chuck Nathanson, Barry Walshock, and eventually came to be the San Diego Dialogue. Now that group, when we met first on a Saturday morning at USD, we began to talk about issues germane to San Diego. What was really affecting San Diego? Issues regarding education, K through 12 education, water, infrastructure, politics, defense. At that time, there were going to be cuts in defense and defense spending, which is a stalwart of San Diego. Base closures. What are we going to do? What's going to happen? And into that, I had been invited as, I think, the only person from Tijuana. And I'd been invited by Neil Morgan, who had just written an article for the National Geographic on San Diego and Tijuana. He actually got some slack in San Diego because of writing the article and how Tijuana and San Diego were intertwined. For those of you that want to look it up, it was the August issue in 1989. And so Neil brought me here to this event, and we started talking about Tijuana. And suddenly, Tijuana became a topic in a group that was talking about leadership issues in the San Diego region. Tijuana was at that point growing significantly with the maquiladora industry. And all of the Asian companies that you can imagine were setting up shop here. And at that time, nobody could really believe the growth that Tijuana was having. But suddenly, the dialogue and all those persons there, the civic leaders, realized how important Tijuana was going to play a role in the community of San Diego. To me, that was civic engagement. It was civic leaders recognizing in a region of the importance of their neighbor. Soon afterwards, we brought in about 20 members from Tijuana, all civic leaders, and we started to work. We started to work on the border. We started to study who crossed the border, who was going into San Diego and who was coming into Tijuana, and what we needed to do. That spurred a pilot program 20 years ago that now is Sentry, that was spearheaded by Lynn Shank, Alan Burson, and of course many other civic leaders. And at that time, we were working jointly. So the 90s were great. It was great for civic engagement. We had gotten the border weights down significantly. You would be taking maybe about, on average, 20, 25 minutes. And we had the Sentry program. But then 9/11 hit. The world changed. Literally, the world changed. And of course, our community changed. Now, the 90s before that spurred significant growth in many issues. You had the joint degrees that were given by CETIS in San Diego State, by UABC and San Diego State. I have a niece that has one of those joint degrees. You had in the philanthropy sectors the opening of the International Community Foundation in San Diego, with Fundación Internacional de la Comunidad here, all for cross-border philanthropy infrastructure. And that was done through civic engagement. But going back again to 9/11, complete change. Things changed dramatically. And both of us, I don't think it was just San Diego, both of us began to look inwards. And we began to forget about the border. Of course, we had an economic boom during 2000, all of this tourist corridor between Ensenada and Tijuana, indeed significant all throughout Baja California. And with that, we, at one point, sort of left behind all of this civic engagement that we had done. Fast forward to about 2011, and through the leadership of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce and its Mexico Business Center and James Clark, they started to organize a group of stakeholders to try things, to make things better in the efficiency of crossing the border. And we felt that that was a very significant issue that had to be addressed. And indeed, a Smart Border Working Committee was created that brought the stakeholders. After that, we felt that we needed something a little bit more permanent and that had more support, and we created the board. We created the Smart Border Coalition Board, which I get to chair, co-chair, with Malin Burnham. Interestingly, Malin was behind the creation of a center at Liberty Station, where now the San Diego Foundation resides. And the name of the center is the Malin Burnham Center for Civic Engagement. So all befitting to him that he is the co-chairman in this organization. And we began to talk about what that organization was going to do. What we were going to do in helping the border community. And we talked about education, we talked about business, we talked about healthcare, we talked about gastronomy. You know, maybe gastronomy is a fantastic issue to talk about and how it brings us together. The first presentation dealt with that. So as we move forward, one of our members, Gaston Luquen Sr., who has been involved for many years in cross-border collaboration and was behind the Minute 319, and you can Google that, Minute 319, which is the rescue of the Colorado River Delta. And that minute was a minute that helped rescue that by allowing the flow of water to again go into the delta. Very, very significant. Anyway, he says, you know what, guys, let's not kid ourselves. If we really can't fix the border, it's going to be very difficult for us to work on any other issues. So let's focus on the border. Let's fix the border. The border is a dumb border. Let's make the border smart. So hence we have the Smart Border Coalition. And together we have worked for the past years. Now, one of the things that we did at the time, there was the construction of San Isidro had just started, and Tijuana, the crossing into El Chaparral, was just about to go underway. Interestingly, Mexico moved much faster at that point. The US was facing budget constraints. And the project was almost stopped on the US side because the reality of budgets did not allow for projects to go forward. And there was significant work to be done. So we sat down, and as the Mexico members, and I'll switch to Spanish, los tijuanenses nos juntamos y dijimos, tenemos que hablar con nuestros compañeros americanos para explicarles y para pedirles que necesitamos trabajar en el tema de la construcción de la frontera. Ellos son clave para esto. They are key. Our neighbors are key to being able to do this. So we move forward, and I sat down with Malin and the public policy person, at the chamber, and we figured out a critical path, a route as to what had to be done. And essentially, we had to go from Customs and Border Protection to GSA, General Services Administration, to request the funds, had to be requested into the budget of the president. And then we would be able to get into Congress, into the Senate, in both Appropriations Committee, go back to the White House and get it finally approved. So ultimately, what we did was that we were a catalyst. We were part of civic engagement, participación cívica de ciudadanos, buscando fortalecer a nuestro trabajo para mejorar la frontera. That was really, I think, what we did. It took on its own force because then many different stakeholders and many different people got the funding. So the funding is there. Now, we still work on getting the funding to be done and invested appropriately and invested in a timely manner. And you'll see that the crossings will help significantly, and they will help significantly in enhancing that ability to develop culture, education, gastronomy, and all of the different ties that keep us together as a community. Now, in thinking about this, you say, well, you know, the interesting thing about cross-border civic engagement is that in the end, you really have no borders. This does not exist. It does not exist for cross-border civic engagements because it has no limits. It's us moving ourselves and our neighbors towards achieving common goals. Thank you very much.